I have always loved May evenings in Calexico. There is something special about this border town when the setting sun paints the sky pink and orange and the faint scent of jasmine wafts over from Mexico. At times like these, I usually sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching life gradually slow down and give way to the evening coolness. But not today. Today, my house was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Adeline's birthday is always a special occasion in our family. My daughter insisted on celebrating it in style, even when there was no particular reason to do so. 39 isn't a milestone, I tried to argue gently when she announced her desire to invite at least 25 guests to my house. Adeline just waved me off. Mom, you don't understand modern life. Maybe she was right. At 67, there was a lot I didn't understand. For example, why spend almost $1,000 on a dress you'll only wear once? Or why good whiskey has to be aged for at least 12 years, or why my own home suddenly felt like a stranger's the moment my children walked through the door. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at my reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee maker. The wrinkles around my eyes had deepened in recent years, and my once chestnut hair was now almost completely gray. I touched up my lips with pale pink lipstick, the only makeup I allowed myself in everyday life. For special occasions, I had a special set that Adeline had given me 3 years ago for Christmas. Mom, you need to look decent sometimes, she said at the time, and I accepted the gift gratefully, although I never used it. Today I decided to wear my best dress, dark blue with small white flowers, simple but elegant. Walter loved me in that dress. You look like a queen, Eunice, he would say, his eyes shining with sincere admiration. Walter passed away 5 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, without causing anyone any trouble. That's how he always was, my quiet, caring husband. Paxton's loud laughter could be heard from the living room. My eldest son had inherited his father's height and broad shoulders, but his personality was more like my brother Dean's, loud, confident, always the center of attention. He had brought his wife Tamsin and their children, 16-year-old Cora and 14-year-old Nash. The teenagers immediately retreated to the far corner of the living room, buried in their phones and only occasionally looking up to grab another snack from the tray. Mom, have you seen my earrings? Adeline burst into the kitchen like a little hurricane. At 39, she looked barely 30, slim, toned, with perfect raven hair that she had her color touched up every 3 weeks at Francois's salon. The emerald ones, I'm sure I left them in your bathroom. Honey, I haven't seen any earrings, I replied, drying my hands on a kitchen towel. Maybe you put them in your makeup bag? God, Mom, I know exactly where I left them. Adeline's voice sounded irritated. You just don't pay attention, as usual. She turned and left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and unspoken discontent. I sighed deeply and went back to cutting vegetables for the salad. Moments like this had become more frequent in recent years, little jabs that could be ignored individually, but together they formed a painful picture of alienation that I preferred not to notice. Grandma Uni, do you have a charger for my iPhone? Cora appeared in the doorway, tall and thin, with straight blonde hair pulled back into a casual bun. It's in my bedroom, sweetie, on the nightstand. I smiled. You can take it. Thanks. She turned to leave, but then stopped. Grandma, what's that strange thing in your closet that looks like an old phone? That is an old phone, dear. A rotary dial phone. They used to use them before cell phones. Really? And you keep junk like that? She giggled and disappeared before I could answer. Junk. That's what my memories had become to the new generation. Junk that took up space for no apparent reason. The old phone belonged to my mother, and I kept it as a memento of her. Next to it in the closet were photo albums, letters from Walter from his time in the Navy, and drawings by Paxton, Adeline, and Marvin. Marvin. I smiled, remembering my youngest. It was a shame he couldn't make it today. His flight had been delayed somewhere in Arizona. The doorbell announced the arrival of new guests. I heard Paxton greet someone with a loud exclamation. It must be Lloyd and his parents. Adeline always tried to impress her husband's family. The wealthy, influential Frosts from San Diego were a far cry from the modest Haddocks from Calexico. Lloyd worked for an investment company and earned enough for Adeline to afford designer clothes and a country club membership. Their 8-year-old son, Avery, attended a private school where the teachers spoke 3 languages and taught the children to play golf. I dried my hands and headed to the living room to greet the guests. At the door, I bumped into Tamsin, who was carrying empty glasses. "Oh, Uni, could you bring some more ice?" she asked with a smile. "And maybe open another bottle of that white wine?" "Of course, dear." I nodded and turned back to the kitchen. Tamsin was a nice woman, just a little absent-minded. She worked as an administrator at the same car company as Paxson, which was where they had met. Unlike Lloyd, who always kept his distance, Tamsin tried to be friendly and attentive. But lately, I had noticed that she, too, had started treating me like a servant rather than a mother-in-law. Returning with a tray full of ice and drinks, I paused in the doorway to the living room. The room was filled with people. Adeline's colleagues from the real estate agency, Paxson's friends, neighbors I knew only superficially. In the center stood Adeline in her new ivory dress, which must have cost as much as a month's rent for a small apartment. Next to her was Lloyd, tall, blonde, with a cold smile and impeccable manners. "And here's my wonderful mother-in-law," he exclaimed when he saw me. His voice was filled with feigned warmth. "Taking care of us all, as always." I smiled and set the tray on the table. Avery, their son, was sitting on the sofa, engrossed in some game on his tablet. He didn't even look up when I approached and patted him on the head. "How's school, Avery?" I asked, trying to get his attention. "Fine," he muttered without looking up from the screen. "Mom, don't distract him," Adeline interjected. "He's on an important level." I walked away feeling like a third wheel at this celebration of life. Paxson was loudly telling a story about a client who wanted to buy a sports car but didn't have a license. Everyone was laughing. Tamsin stood nearby, looking proudly at her husband, occasionally adding details to his story. I returned to the kitchen and began preparing the cake for serving. It was a special recipe, a chocolate cake with raspberry filling, Adeline's favorite dessert since childhood. I had spent the entire morning baking it, and the result was impressive even by my strict standards. 39 candles were too many, so I decided to limit myself to 3 decorative star-shaped candles. When I lit the candles and brought the cake into the living room, the conversation died down. Paxson began to clap his hands, and the others joined in. Adeline stood by the fireplace, her face lighting up with a smile at the sight of the cake. "Happy birthday, dear," I said, coming closer. And then I noticed how her expression changed. Her smile became forced, her eyes narrowed. She leaned toward her friend standing next to her and whispered something. Her friend covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide a giggle. "What is it?" I asked, stopping. "Nothing, Mom," Adeline replied. "It's just, you look exactly like my maid right now." Time seemed to stand still. I stood there with the cake in my hands, feeling the blood drain from my face. An awkward silence hung in the air, broken by Paxson's nervous chuckle. "Adeline means that Consuela also wears dresses with flowers on them," he tried to explain, but that only made things worse. I slowly put the cake on the table. The candles continued to burn, their light reflecting in Adeline's eyes, which looked at me with slight surprise, as if she didn't understand why I was reacting this way. "Mom, it was a joke," she said. "Don't take it so seriously." But I wasn't listening anymore. I turned and left the room, feeling the guests' eyes on me. I went up the stairs, into my bedroom, and closed the door. My heart was pounding in my throat. "You look just like my maid." Adeline's words echoed in my head. It wasn't even the comparison to Consuela, the lovely Mexican woman who cleaned Adeline's house twice a week. It was the tone in which it was said, the contempt that seeped through every syllable, the ease with which my own daughter had humiliated me in front of all the guests. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain. The sky had already darkened, and the first stars were twinkling timidly overhead. Somewhere out there, among those stars, was Walter. What would he say if he could see what our family had become? Walter had always been a calm, level-headed man. He worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop on the outskirts of Calexico, and took pride in his ability to fix any engine. We met when I was 19, and he was 22. I had just finished nursing school and gotten a job as a nurse at a local clinic. Walter came in with a cut on his hand. A piece of metal had slipped and left a deep gash in his palm. "Does it hurt?" I asked as I cleaned the wound. "Only when I laugh," he replied with a serious expression, then smiled so broadly that it took my breath away. We were married a year later. Paxson was born when I was 22. Adeline came along 4 years later, and 4 years after that, when we weren't planning on having any more children, Marvin was born, our quiet, thoughtful boy. Walter was a wonderful father, patient, loving, willing to spend hours teaching his children everything he knew. He taught Paxson how to fix a bicycle, showed Adeline how to grow tomatoes in our little garden, and read Marvin books about travel in faraway places. We weren't rich, but we never wanted for anything. The house on Olmos Avenue was left to us by Walter's parents. We gradually fixed it up, adding rooms as the children grew, replacing the roof when the old one started to leak, and planting a garden where there had once been a vacant lot. When Paxson graduated from high school and decided not to go to college but to start working right away, Walter supported him. "The main thing is that a person does what he loves," he said. Adeline, on the other hand, always wanted more. She wanted to leave Calexico, go to a prestigious university, and live in a big city. Walter and I saved money for her education, denying ourselves many things. Marvin was a special child, quiet, observant, with an unusual view of the world. He could spend hours watching ants build their anthill or clouds change shape. He had problems at school, not academic, but social. The other children thought he was strange. His teachers complained that he had his head in the clouds. But Walter always said, "Our Marvin just sees things that others don't." After school, Marvin tried several professions, but never stayed anywhere for long. Eventually, he became a long-haul truck driver. "I like being on the road, Mom," he told me once. "The road gives me freedom." Walter died suddenly of a massive heart attack in his sleep. He was only 64. It took me almost a year to start living again. The children helped as best they could. Paxson took care of the paperwork, Adeline organized the funeral, and Marvin was just there, silently supporting me with his presence. And then something changed. Gradually, almost imperceptibly. Paxson started coming by less and less, saying he was busy. Adeline only called when she needed something. Marvin went on long trips and disappeared for weeks at a time. 2 years ago, when Paxson and his family were temporarily homeless due to renovations at their house, I offered them a place to stay. The temporary solution dragged on. It was convenient for them, and I was glad not to be alone. Then Adeline joined us with her husband and son. They had sold their house and were waiting for their new, more spacious mansion to be built. So gradually, my house filled up with people, but I felt increasingly lonely. Sounds of merriment came from downstairs. Apparently, no one was bothered by my absence, and the party continued. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands, veins protruding, covered with fine wrinkles. Hands that held my children when they took their first steps, hands that cooked their meals, washed their clothes, wiped their tears when they were hurt. And now I had become something like a servant to them, convenient, invisible, ready to do anything they asked. Or not even a request, but an expectation that I would do what I was supposed to do. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart. No, that was fine. The chains that I had used to bind myself to the role of eternal mother, eternal victim, ready to give everything and ask for nothing in return, were breaking. The door creaked, and I looked up. Paxson was standing in the doorway, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. "Adeline didn't mean to hurt you. You know how she can be sharp." "It's okay, Paxson," I replied calmly. "I'm just tired. Tell everyone I'm going to lie down and rest." "But we haven't cut the cake yet." He looked distraught, like a little boy whose trip to the amusement park had been canceled. "You'll manage without me." I smiled and turned away toward the window, signaling that the conversation was over. When the door closed behind him, I went to the closet and took out an old box of documents. Among them was the deed to the house, Walter's will, insurance policies. The house was entirely mine. The children lived here as guests, although they had long since forgotten that. I made my decision as suddenly as a headache sometimes comes, abruptly, without warning. I would sell the house. Let them understand what it's like to lose something you take for granted. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy backpack I had been carrying for years had finally fallen off my shoulders. I lay down on the bed, still dressed, and closed my eyes. Music and laughter drifted up from downstairs. Tomorrow, everything would change. But today, let them have their fun. The morning after Adeline's birthday was surprisingly clear. I woke up earlier than usual when the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek through the blinds. The house was silent. Yesterday's celebration had lasted well past midnight, and now everyone was asleep. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to creak the floorboards, and went to the window. Calexico was waking up slowly. In the distance, I could see the border with Mexico, and beyond it, Mexicali, the twin city with which we were connected by 1,000 invisible threads. I loved this view, especially at dawn, when the two cities seemed to be one, without the fences and border posts separating them. Yesterday's decision did not disappear with the arrival of the new day. On the contrary, it grew stronger, taking root in my mind. I no longer had any doubts. The house had to be sold. It wasn't an impulsive reaction to my daughter's hurtful words. Rather, that phrase was the last straw that broke the camel's back. I quietly went down to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and took out the phone book. I needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in real estate. I remembered that a few years ago when Walter and I were updating our will, we had consulted Orlando Willoughby, an elderly but very competent woman with an office in the city center. The tea was still hot when I dialed the number. Of course, I didn't expect to find her at work at such an early hour, but I could leave a message. Orlando Willoughby's office. A cheerful female voice answered unexpectedly. Good morning, I said, momentarily taken aback. This is Eunice Haddock. I didn't think anyone would be in at this hour. Oh, Mrs. Haddock, the woman exclaimed. I remember you. You came in with your husband a few years ago. I'm Darla, Miss Willoughby's assistant. We're just very busy today, so I came in early. How can I help you? I need some advice about selling my house, I said, lowering my voice, even though I knew no one could hear me in this part of the house. Is that possible? Of course. Miss Willoughby has an opening at 11:30 today. Would that work for you? I agreed, wrote down the address, and thanked Darla. When I hung up, I felt slightly dizzy. Everything had happened so quickly, as if some unknown force had picked me up and carried me forward. I managed to make breakfast before anyone else in the house came downstairs. Paxson was the first to appear, his face creased and his eyes red. Clear signs of a hangover. Good morning, Mom, he muttered, heading straight for the coffee machine. God, what was in that whiskey last night? Probably whiskey, I smiled, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. How's Tamsin? She's asleep. He took a sip of coffee and grimaced. The kids, too. Can you turn that up? I turned up the coffee machine, and it roared louder as it ground beans for a new batch. Paxson grimaced. I meant quieter, Mom. Sorry, I said, turning it down and sitting down across from him. Paxson, I have things to do in town today. I'll be back for lunch. Okay, he nodded, not seeming particularly interested. What kind of business? I have to meet with a lawyer. That caught his attention. He looked up from his plate, and I saw a flash of concern in his eyes. Is something wrong? Problems with taxes? No, just routine stuff. I looked away, not wanting to lie directly. By the way, did Adeline go home yesterday or stay the night? She stayed, of course. You know, Lloyd, he doesn't drive after his third drink, and he had a lot more than that yesterday, Paxson chuckled. They're in the guest bedroom. I nodded and started clearing the table. My guest bedroom had long since become their bedroom. It held some of their clothes, Adeline's makeup, even Avery's toys. Little by little, room by room, my house was turning into their territory. Mom, Paxson's voice became more serious. About yesterday, Adeline went too far. I told her that. It's okay, I turned to him with a smile. It was just a joke. Not a very good one. He shook his head. You know, she didn't want to, well, you understand. I understand. I looked at my watch. I have to get ready. Going up to my bedroom, I opened the closet and stood there indecisively for a while. My wardrobe wasn't very diverse. A few dresses, a couple of suits for special occasions, jeans and t-shirts for everyday wear. I chose a gray suit that I had worn to a colleague's funeral 2 years ago. It looked strict and formal, just what I needed for a meeting with a lawyer. I had almost finished getting dressed when there was a knock at the door. Without waiting for an answer, Adeline entered the room. "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute?" She looked a little embarrassed, which was rare for her. "Of course, dear." I buttoned the last button on my jacket. "What is it?" "I wanted to apologize for yesterday." She sat down on the edge of the bed. "That joke about the maid, it was stupid." "Don't worry about it." I turned to the mirror to apply some lipstick. "Like I told Paxson, it was just a joke." "Yes, but—" She hesitated. "I can see I hurt your feelings. You left the party and didn't come back down." "I was tired," I said, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "By the way, how was the cake? Did you like it?" "Very much," she smiled. "As always, the best." "Mom, where are you going?" "Is something wrong?" "Just running some errands." I turned to her. "I'll be back for dinner." Adeline gave me a searching look. "You look too formal for errands. Is it something serious?" "I have to meet with a lawyer." I repeated the same half-truth I had told Paxson. "A lawyer?" Her eyebrows shot up. "Why?" "To update some documents. Nothing important." She nodded, but her eyes still showed doubt. "Do you want me to go with you?" "I was just heading into town to stop by the office and pick up some documents for the new house." "No, thanks," I said, picking up my bag. "It won't take long. You should rest after yesterday." "As you say," she shrugged and headed for the door. "See you later, then." When the door closed behind her, I breathed a deep sigh. I didn't like hiding my plans from the kids, but I knew that if I told them about my decision to sell the house now, they would do everything they could to talk me out of it. And I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not now. Orlando Willoughby's office was located in an old red brick building on Main Street. The sign on the door modestly read, "Willoughby and Associates, Legal Services." I went up to the second floor and entered the reception area, where I was greeted by a smiling middle-aged woman, the same Darla I had spoken to on the phone. "Mrs. Haddock!" "Punctual as always," she said, rising from behind her desk. "Miss Willoughby is waiting for you. Please come in." Orlando's office looked exactly as I remembered it. A massive oak desk, walls lined with bookcases, soft light from a green-shaded desk lamp. Orlando herself, a tall woman in her 70s with short gray hair and a sharp gaze, stood up to greet me. "Eunice, it's been ages." She shook my hand firmly. "Sit down. Darla said you wanted to consult us about selling the house?" "Yes," I said, sinking into the chair opposite her. "I've decided to sell the house on Olmos Avenue." "The one you inherited from Walter's parents?" She raised her eyebrows. "If I'm not mistaken, you've lived there for how long? 40 years?" 38, I nodded. "But it's time for a change." "I understand," she leaned back in her chair. "Well, from a legal standpoint, it's quite simple. The house is entirely yours. After Walter's death, his share passed to you according to his will. There are no encumbrances or debts on the property. You are free to dispose of it as you see fit." "What about the children?" I clasped my hands on my knees. "They've been living with me for the last 2 years." Orlando looked at me intently. "Do they have any legal rights to the house? Joint ownership? Shared ownership?" "No, nothing like that." "In that case, they're just tenants," she shrugged. "By law, you must notify them of the sale and give them reasonable time to move out. Usually that's 30 days, but since this is a family matter, the court may extend that period to 60 or even 90 days if the case goes to court." "I hope it doesn't come to that," I sighed. "I just want everything to be above board." "It will be." Orlando opened a desk drawer and took out a folder. "Let's check that you have all the right documents: title deed, technical passport, cadastral plan." "Do you have all of that?" I nodded. Walter had always been meticulous about paperwork, and I had inherited that trait. "Excellent." She made a note in her notebook. "Now about the sale procedure. You'll need a real estate agent. Do you have anyone in mind?" I thought about it. Adeline worked at Golden Key, one of the largest agencies in Calexico. It would have made sense to turn to her or her colleagues. But I knew that was impossible. No, I replied, but I'd like to find someone reliable. I can recommend Venona Jade from Desert Oasis. Orlando wrote the name and phone number on a piece of paper. She specializes in real estate in your area. And importantly, she's not affiliated with Golden Key. I smiled gratefully. Orlando always knew how to read between the lines. As for the price, she continued, houses in your neighborhood are in high demand right now. The newly built solar power plant has attracted new residents to Calexico, and the real estate market is booming. I think you'll be able to get a decent amount for your house. We spent another hour or so discussing the details of the upcoming deal. Orlando explained all the legal aspects to me, told me about the taxes I would have to pay, and helped me come up with a plan of action. When I left her office, I felt much lighter. Now I had a clear plan, and that gave me confidence. My next stop was the Desert Oasis, a small but respectable real estate agency on the corner of 2nd and Broadway. Venona Jade turned out to be an energetic woman in her 50s with short red hair and a sprinkling of freckles on her face. Mrs. Haddock, she shook my hand energetically. Nice to meet you. Orlando just called and gave me a brief overview of the situation. Please have a seat. Her office was much more modest than Orlando's, but just as functional. The walls were decorated with photos of houses she had sold and several diplomas and certificates. So, you want to sell your house on Olmos Avenue, she said, opening her laptop. I know that area. It's old but very promising. How many rooms does your house have? 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, an office, and a basement, I listed. Plus a 2-car garage and a small garden. Sounds wonderful, she typed, her eyes glued to the screen. Year built? 1958, but we did a major renovation in the 90s and replaced the roof and heating system 10 years ago. Venona continued asking questions, and I answered, trying not to miss a single detail. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. Mrs. Haddock, you have a beautiful home. I think we can put it on the market at a very attractive price. When are you planning to start the selling process? As soon as possible. I met her surprised gaze. I have personal reasons. I understand, she nodded. In that case, we need to move quickly. Here's my plan. I'll come by tomorrow, take a look at the house, and take some photos. Then we'll discuss the price and sales strategy. If all goes well, we can put the listing out there in a week. Sounds great, I smiled. But there's one condition. My children can't know about our meeting, at least not yet. Winona raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't ask any questions. No problem, I can come when they're not home. Or we could introduce me as, let's say, an appraiser for an insurance company. That would be perfect, I said, feeling relieved. Tomorrow at 10:30, Paxton will be at work and Adeline will take her son to swimming lessons. Only Tamsin will be home, but she usually does yoga in her room at that time. It's a deal, Venona made a note in her diary. 10:30 tomorrow, and don't worry, I'll be extremely discreet. When I left the Desert Oasis office, it was already around 2 o'clock. I decided to stop at a small cafe nearby to grab a bite to eat and collect my thoughts before heading home. I sat down at a table by the window, ordered a sandwich and tea, and took out my phone. There was one message from Marvin. Mom, I'll be in Calexico tomorrow evening. My flight is landing earlier than planned. Can I stay with you for a couple of days? I smiled and replied, Of course, dear. Your room is ready. I'll be happy to see you. Marvin's arrival couldn't have been more timely. Of all my children, he was the most understanding and sensitive. Maybe he would support me in my decision, or at least not judge me. I got home around 3. No one was in the living room, but I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. I went in and found Paxton and Adeline engaged in lively conversation over a cup of coffee. Oh, Mom, Paxton exclaimed when he saw me. We were starting to worry. How did the meeting with the lawyer go? Fine, thank you, I said, putting my bag on a chair. Where is everyone else? Tamsin took the kids to the mall, Paxton replied. Lloyd's in San Diego on business. He'll be back in a couple of days. Avery's with him. I see. I poured myself a glass of water. Did anything happen while I was out? No, everything's the same as usual. Adeline took a sip of her coffee. Mom, we were just talking. Maybe we should organize a spa day for you. You know, to make up for yesterday. Manicure, pedicure, massage, the whole shebang. I looked at her in surprise. Adeline rarely showed such concern. Thanks, sweetie, but it's not necessary. I really wasn't offended. We insist, Paxson chimed in. You deserve to pamper yourself a little. I shook my head, looking at my children. They were really trying to make up for what they had done, and it was touching. But I knew that no day at the spa could change how they really felt about me, and my decision remained unchanged. By the way, I decided to prepare the ground. Marvin is coming tomorrow evening. He'll be staying for a couple of days. Great! Paxson beamed. I haven't seen him in ages. We'll have to get out somewhere, sit down, like in the good old days. Just not the rusty nail, Adeline grimaced. Last time you came back from there in such a state that I was embarrassed in front of the neighbors. Come on, sis, Paxson winked at me. A man has a right to relax after a long drive. I listened to their banter with a slight smile. At moments like this, they reminded me of themselves as children. Paxson, always ready for adventure, and Adeline, always worried about what others would think. Okay, I'm going to my room, I said, when their argument began to die down. I'm a little tired. Sure, Mom, Adeline nodded. Get some rest. I'll make dinner tonight. Thanks, sweetie. Going up to my room, I closed the door and took a deep breath. It had been a busy but productive day. The first steps had been taken. Now I had to wait for Vinon, assess the house, and put it up for sale. And then the hardest part would begin, explaining to the children why I had done this. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly nervous. Venona was due to arrive at 10:30, and I needed to make sure the house looked its best. I got up early and started tidying up the living room and kitchen. Mom, what are you doing? Tamsin came downstairs as I was finishing vacuuming the living room carpet. Why are you cleaning so thoroughly? Just decided to tidy up a bit, I smiled. The insurance company appraiser is coming today, and I want everything to look presentable. An appraiser? Tamsin looked surprised. Why? Renewing the insurance policy, I explained, sticking to my story. Nothing special, just routine. I see, she nodded, not seeming particularly interested. I'm going to do yoga upstairs today, if you're not busy. Okay, dear. At exactly 10:30, the doorbell rang. Venona was as punctual as clockwork. Good morning, Mrs. Haddock, she said, extending her hand. Are you ready to begin the inspection? Of course, please come in, I said, letting her into the house. And please call me Eunice. We spent the next 2 hours going through the house room by room. Venona took notes, photographed, measured the space, and asked lots of questions. She was particularly interested in the original interior details, the antique fireplace in the living room, the stained glass window on the landing, the wood paneling in the study. You have a beautiful home, Uni, she said when we finished the tour and returned to the kitchen. It has a lot of character and is in a great location. I think we can list it for a very decent price. She named a figure that made me gasp. It was much more than I had expected. Are you sure? I asked incredulously. The house is old, and although we've kept it in good condition, I'm absolutely sure, Winona smiled. There's a lot of demand for houses like this right now, with history, with character. New builds are standard, but your house is unique. Plus, the neighborhood has become very popular with young families. I don't think we'll have any trouble finding a buyer. We discussed a sales strategy and signed a contract. Venona promised to prepare all the documents and photos within a few days, and by the end of the week, we could put the house on the market. When do you plan to tell your family? She asked finally. Tonight, I replied, feeling my heart sink. My youngest son is coming, and I want everyone to be there. Good luck, she squeezed my hand. And remember, you're doing this for yourself. You deserve to start a new chapter in your life. When Winona left, I sat in the kitchen, staring out the window at the backyard. There, under the old oak tree, was the swing set Walter had built for the children years ago. Paxson broke his arm falling off it when he was 8. Adeline spent hours on it, swinging and dreaming of the future. Marvin often sat there with a book, escaping from the noisy world. So many memories were tied to this house. But I knew I couldn't live in the past. It was time to move on. The keys to my new apartment were cold in my hand. I stood in front of the door with the number 214, not daring to go in. Behind me were 3 weeks of tense negotiations, tears, accusations, and finally, saying goodbye to the house where I had spent most of my life. Now a new page was opening for me. My own apartment in the sunny Oasis residential complex on the eastern outskirts of Calexico. Finally, gathering my courage, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a slight creak, letting me into my new home. A small hallway led to a bright living room connected to the kitchen. To the right was the bedroom. To the left, a compact bathroom. Everything was clean, modern, and completely faceless. Not a single thing reminded me of the past. The movers had delivered my furniture and boxes of belongings yesterday. I deliberately took as little as possible from my old house, only the bare essentials and a few mementos. I sold or gave away the rest. The children got most of the furniture and appliances, as well as all the little things they considered theirs, even though they had never bothered to take them when they moved out. I remembered their faces when I told them I had decided to sell the house. It was the evening Mervyn arrived. We were sitting at dinner, the whole family together for the first time in a long time. Paxton was joking, Adeline was talking about her new project, and Tamsin was scolding the children in a low voice for their table manners. Marvin, as always, listened more than he spoke. "I have some news," I said when there was a pause in the conversation. "I'm selling the house." The silence that followed was deafening. Paxton froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Adeline slowly put down her wineglass. "What do you mean selling the house?" she asked, as if she hadn't heard me. "Exactly what I said. I signed a contract with a real estate agent. The house will be listed at the end of the week." "But why?" Paxton looked confused. "Is something wrong with the house? Does it need repairs? Is the roof leaking?" "The house is fine," I said, taking a sip of water. "It's just time for a change." "Mom, you can't just sell the house." Adeline raised her voice. This is our home." "Technically, it's my house," I tried to speak calmly, "and I have the right to do with it as I see fit." "But we live here," she exclaimed. "Where are we supposed to go?" "You have time to find a new place. I'll give you 60 days after the sale." 60 days? Paxton shook his head. "Mom, are you kidding? We can't just—" "Mom, she's serious," Marvin said quietly, looking at me intently. I can see it in her eyes. That night, Adeline and Paxton took turns trying to change my mind. They talked about family values, how hard it would be for the grandchildren to get used to a new place, my age and loneliness. Adeline even hinted that I might not be in my right mind and should consult a doctor. Only Marvin didn't join in. He found me later, sitting on the porch looking at the stars. "Is this because of what Adeline said at the birthday party?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "Partly," I admitted, "but there are many more reasons than that." "I'm listening." And I told him everything. How I had gradually begun to feel like a stranger in my own home. How the children had come to take me for granted. How all my desires and needs had been pushed into the background. "I want to live for myself, Marvin, at least for the years I have left." He was silent for a long time, then simply hugged me. "I understand, Mom, and I'll support you whatever you decide." The house sold surprisingly quickly, in just 2 weeks. Winona was right. Demand was high, and we even managed to get a higher price than we had originally asked for. A young couple from Los Angeles, expecting their first child, fell in love with the house at first sight. "We can imagine our children growing up here," said the woman, stroking her rounded belly. "It's the perfect place for a family." I used to think the same thing. Now, standing in the middle of my new apartment, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Slight anxiety, excitement, and surprisingly relief. For the first time in many years, I could arrange the space exclusively for myself without thinking about whether it would be comfortable for my children, grandchildren, or their friends. I started with the kitchen, arranging the dishes and groceries. Then I moved on to the bedroom and made the bed with fresh sheets that I had bought especially for my new home. I hung my clothes in the closet. Not that I had much. I had never been a fashionista. I placed a photograph of Walter on the bedside table, the only thing connecting me to the past that I had decided to keep in sight. "There you are, sweetheart," I said quietly, looking at his smiling face. "We're starting over with a clean slate. Only now I'll have to manage on my own." The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and for a moment I thought it might be one of the children, Adeline or Paxson, checking to see how I was settling in and trying to change my mind again. But standing at the door was a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, stately, with short gray hair and lively brown eyes. She was holding a basket covered with a napkin. "Good afternoon. You must be the new neighbor," she smiled, extending her hand. "I'm Layla Priest. I live in apartment 216. I brought some blueberry muffins. They're my own baking." "Eunice Haddock." I shook her hand. "Very nice to meet you. Please come in. I haven't unpacked everything yet, though." "Oh, don't worry about that." Layla waved her hand and stepped decisively into the apartment. "We've all been there. When I moved here 3 years ago, my boxes were unpacked for a whole month." I led her into the kitchen where we sat down at a small table. The muffins were delicious, moist on the inside, with a crispy crust on top, and just the right amount of blueberries. "You're a great baker," I said sincerely. "These muffins remind me of the ones my mother used to make." "It's an old family recipe," Layla smiled. "So what brought you to our humble oasis?" I briefly told her my story, leaving out the personal details and emotional side. Just the facts. I sold my family home and decided to start a new life. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Layla nodded. "I went through the same thing when Bernard, my husband, passed away. The children wanted me to move in with them or into a nursing home. Can you imagine? I was only 67. She snorted. "Instead, I sold our house, opened a small cafe, and started living the way I always wanted to." "You had a cafe?" I asked. "Sweet Memories on Main Street. Maybe you've heard of it?" "I sold it 2 years ago when I decided it was time to retire completely. But I still bake for my old customers sometimes," she winked. "And for my new neighbors, of course." Of. We talked for almost 2 hours. Layla turned out to be a surprisingly easy conversationalist, witty, observant, with lots of interesting stories. She told me about Sunny Oasis and its residents, the nearest shops and cafes, and the best places to buy fresh fruit and vegetables. "What are your plans now that you're in a new place?" she asked when the conversation turned to more personal topics. "To be honest, I haven't decided yet," I admitted. "For so many years, my life revolved around my family. I need time to figure out what I want for myself." "Oh, there are so many possibilities." Layla waved her hand energetically. "There's a great pool and yoga studio here in the complex. The community center on the corner offers adult classes, from computer literacy to Spanish. And St. Catherine's Hospital is always looking for volunteers." "Volunteering at a hospital," I repeated thoughtfully. "You know, that might be perfect. I used to be a nurse when I was younger." "See?" Layla beamed. "That would be wonderful. By the way, I'm going to a computer literacy class tomorrow morning. Would you like to join me? The first lesson is free." I hesitated. I've always had a complicated relationship with computers. Walter bought our first computer in the early 2000s, but I never learned how to use it confidently. And the smartphone my children gave me for my 65th birthday was still a mystery to me, and I only used about 10% of its capabilities. "I don't know, Layla. I'm so clumsy with these things." "All the more reason to learn." She nodded decisively. "Trust me, it will change your life. I even order groceries online now. And I talk to my grandchildren on video chat, even though they live in Oregon." "Okay," I decided. "Let's give it a try." When Layla left, I continued unpacking, but now with renewed enthusiasm. Maybe this move would really open up new opportunities for me. Maybe 70 really isn't that old, and I still have time to live for myself. In the evening, Adeline called. I could tell from her voice that she was upset. "Mom, how are you? Have you settled in?" There was a hint of disapproval in her voice. "Yes, thank you. The apartment is very cozy." I decided not to rise to the provocation. "I don't understand how you can call that bug-infested place cozy," she snorted. "You don't even have room to turn around in there." "There's plenty of room for one person," I replied calmly. "How are you guys doing? Found a new place?" "Lloyd says we'll have to stay with his parents until our house is finished," she said accusingly. "You know how much I dislike his mother. She always looks down on me." "I'm sorry to hear that, dear," I said sincerely, "but I'm sure you'll manage." "Have you thought about—" She hesitated. Have you thought about giving me back some of the money from selling the house to Paxson? After all, it was our house too. We could use the money as a down payment on a new place. There it was. I had been waiting for this question since the sale. Adeline, the money from the sale is my retirement. I need something to live on for the next 15 to 20 years. But Mom, her voice rose, you're not going to spend all that money. Paxson and I are in a difficult situation, and the grandchildren. Honey, I interrupted her, I'll think about it. But right now I have to go. I still have a lot of unpacking to do. I could almost physically feel her disappointment and anger, but I said goodbye firmly and hung up. That conversation was just the first sign. I knew that the children would not give up trying to get their share of the sale of the house, or worse, convince me to return to my old life, the comfortable life of a grandmother who is always on hand when you need someone to babysit, cook dinner, or lend you money until payday. The next few days were spent in pleasant busyness. I furnished my apartment, got to know my neighbors, and explored the neighborhood. As promised, I took Layla to a computer literacy class, where I was surprised to discover that I wasn't the most hopeless student. Some of my peers had never even turned on a computer by themselves. The teacher, a young man named Griffin, was patient and attentive. He showed us how to create and save documents, how to use email, and how to search for information on the internet. Next time, he announced at the end of the lesson, we'll learn how to use social media and video chat. You'll be able to communicate with your family and friends, even if they live on the other side of the world. See how useful it is, Layla whispered to me as we left the classroom. And after the computer course, we can sign up for yoga for seniors. They have a great instructor there. I smiled, feeling warm inside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like more than just a mother and grandmother, but a person with interests and possibilities. On Friday, I went to St. Catherine's Hospital to find out about the volunteer program. The coordinator, a friendly middle-aged woman named Rachel Olmo, met me in a small office near the main entrance. "Nurse," she exclaimed when I told her about my experience. "That's wonderful." We're really short on people with medical training. She explained that volunteers with a medical background could help in various departments, from pediatrics to geriatrics. But they especially needed people in the palliative care unit. "I won't hide it, it's emotionally difficult work," Rachel said, looking at me intently. "But it's also very rewarding. You help people in their final days maintain their dignity and not feel alone." "I can do it," I said confidently. "When can I start?" "There's a mandatory introductory course for all volunteers, hospital rules, safety procedures, and the basics of communicating with patients. It starts next Tuesday and lasts 3 days. After that, you can start working." I filled out all the necessary paperwork, and leaving the hospital, felt a surge of energy. I had a goal, something meaningful that I could do for others using my knowledge and experience. On the way home, I stopped at the supermarket to pick up some groceries. Standing in line at the checkout, I noticed a familiar figure. Tamsin, Paxson's wife, was picking out fruit in the produce section. I wanted to go over to her, but something stopped me. Instead, I quickly paid and headed for the exit, hoping to go unnoticed. It didn't work. "Eunice," Tamsin's voice rang out as I was opening the car door. "Wait." She ran up to me slightly out of breath. She was holding a bag of groceries. "I'm so glad to see you," she exclaimed, hugging me. "We all miss you so much." "I miss you too, dear," I replied, and it was true. Despite all the difficulties, I loved my family. "How are you settling in?" Tamsin looked at my face. "You look well, refreshed." "Thank you," I smiled. "Everything's fine." The apartment is cozy, the neighbors are nice. I even signed up for a computer class. "Really?" She looked genuinely surprised. "That's great. Paxson will be happy to hear that you're learning new skills." We talked a little more about the weather, the kids, and how their search for a new home was going. Tamsin was the only one in the family who seemed to genuinely accept my decision. "You know, I understand you," she said suddenly, lowering her voice. "Sometimes I dream of having my own space, too, where no one leaves their socks lying around and expects dinner to cook itself." We laughed, and for a moment I felt a connection with her, a connection that had never been there before. Come visit, I offered. With the kids or on your own, whatever you want. I'd love to have you. I will, she nodded. Just don't tell Paxton I support you. He's really angry right now. I won't, I promised. Say hi to everyone. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. Paxton was inviting me to Sunday dinner. Everyone will be there, he said, and I could hear a note of insistence in his voice. I knew right away that this wasn't just a family dinner. They were going to give me group therapy, to convince me to come back, or at least share the money from the sale of the house. But I couldn't refuse. That would have been too obvious an avoidance of confrontation. On Sunday, I put on my best dress, dark blue with a small floral pattern, the one that had made Adeline compare me to a maid. It was a small act of defiance, my way of showing that I wasn't going to change just to meet their expectations. Paxton and Tamsin had temporarily rented a house in the same neighborhood where we used to live, small but cozy with a terrace and a garden. When I pulled up, Adeline and Marvin's cars were already parked at the entrance. Grandma! Paxton's daughter Cora was the first to spot me and ran toward me. Her brother Nash followed, a little less enthusiastically. My darlings! I hugged them both. How you've grown in 2 weeks! You're exaggerating, Grandma, Nash snorted, but I could tell he was pleased. The house was filled with an atmosphere of feigned merriment. Paxton bustled about the grill in the backyard. Tamsin set the table, and Adeline told Lloyd something, who, as usual, looked slightly detached. Avery, their son, sat in the corner with his tablet, completely absorbed in some game. Only Marvin, standing by the window with a glass of beer, seemed truly relaxed. Mom! Paxton waved at me with a barbecue spatula. I'm so glad you're here. The steaks are almost ready. Dinner was relatively peaceful. We talked about the weather, the kids' successes at school, Paxton's new contract. Adeline told us about the house she had recently sold for a record price. Marvin shared stories from his travels. Everything was almost like it used to be, except that I sensed a certain tension in the air. Unspoken grievances, unasked questions. After dessert, Paxton cleared his throat and looked around the table. Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something important, he began. I'm listening, I said, sitting up straight, bracing myself for what was to come. We're all very worried about you, he continued. Living alone at your age in an unfamiliar neighborhood, it's dangerous. And lonely, Adeline added. You always said family was the most important thing. And we thought, Paxton paused, that maybe you should reconsider your decision. You don't have to move back into the old house, but maybe we could find something closer to us. Or even, you could live with one of us. With us, for example, Adeline quickly interjected. We'll have a big house when it's finished. You could have a whole floor to yourself, complete independence, but we'd always be there if you needed help. I looked at their faces, concerned, serious, sincere. They really thought they were offering the best solution for me. But I knew that behind their concern lay their own interests, financial, practical, emotional. Thank you for your concern, I said gently. But I'm quite happy where I am now. I have new friends, new activities. I've signed up for computer classes and I'm going to volunteer at the hospital. Volunteer? Adeline didn't hide her surprise. Why? You're retired. You should be resting. I like being useful, I replied simply. And I missed working in healthcare. But Mom, she persisted, haven't you thought about us? About your grandchildren? They need their grandmother around. I'll always be around, I smiled. It's just that now I have my own life too. What about the money? Lloyd suddenly asked, speaking for the first time during the entire meal. You got a significant amount from selling the house. Haven't you thought about helping the children with housing? Lloyd? Adeline shot her husband an indignant look, although it was obvious that they had discussed this question beforehand. It's all right, I said, turning to my son-in-law. Yes, I got good money for the house. Some of it will go toward my living expenses in the coming years. Some will go toward my grandchildren's education when the time comes. As for the rest, I haven't decided yet. I put the kettle on and went to the window. In 6 months, the view from my window had changed several times, From the summer heat, when the trees stood languishing in the scorching sun, to the riot of colors in autumn, and now to the peaceful tranquility of winter, almost like Christmas. There was never a real winter in Calexico, but December mornings were still greeted with a slight chill, and sometimes even fog rolling across the ground. The kettle whistled, and I returned to the kitchen counter. As I brewed my morning tea, now a special green tea that Layla had brought back from her trip to San Francisco, I caught my reflection in the mirrored surface of the microwave. Even now, months later, I was still amazed by what I saw. My hairstyle had changed. Instead of my traditional bun, I now had a short cut with soft waves framing my face. The gray hair I had previously tried to hide with cheap dye now shimmered beautifully, accentuated by a special shampoo. The wrinkles, of course, hadn't gone anywhere, but my skin looked fresher, as if it were glowing from within. The result of a new skincare regimen recommended by Jenny, a nurse at the hospice where I now worked as a consultant 3 days a week. But the main difference wasn't in my appearance. It was in her eyes. Lively, clear, looking at the world with interest and even a slight challenge. These were the eyes of a woman who had finally found herself. This morning was no different from dozens of others in my new life, but it was special. Today, my children were coming to visit me, all together for the first time in 3 months. I had invited them over for lunch to celebrate the upcoming holidays, and to my surprise, they all agreed. Even Adeline, who had practically stopped talking to me after our last conversation about money, limiting herself to rare, curt phone calls. I finished my tea, did my hair, put on some light makeup, and got dressed. Dark blue pants, a beige blouse with subtle embroidery, and small silver hoop earrings that Layla had given me for Thanksgiving. Perhaps for the first time in many years, I felt truly beautiful. Not young. No, I wasn't trying to cheat time, but elegant, confident, and a woman who knew her worth. The Quiet Harbor Hospice came into my life almost by accident. After completing a volunteer training course, I started working in the palliative care unit at St. Catherine's Hospital, helping nurses with simple procedures and just talking to patients. One day, the head of the unit, Dr. Eliza Winthrop, approached me. "Eunice, I've been watching you for a while," she said. "You have an amazing gift for communicating with patients, especially those who are in the final stages of life." I smiled awkwardly, not knowing how to respond to such a compliment. "A new hospice is opening in town," Dr. Winthrop continued. "It's small, with only 10 rooms, but it has wonderful staff and a great philosophy. They need a consultant, someone who will help patients and their families make difficult decisions about the end of life. I recommended you." "But I'm not a psychologist," I objected. "I don't have any special training." "You have life experience," she interrupted me gently, "and natural empathy. The rest can be learned. Think about it. It's a paid position, 3 days a week." I thought about it, and I agreed. Since then, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I have spent time at Quiet Harbor, talking to patients and their loved ones, helping them come to terms with the inevitable and find the strength to face the final stage of their lives. It was emotionally difficult work, but it gave me a sense of deep meaning that I had probably never felt before in my life. On the other days, I did yoga in Layla's group, attended a book club at the local library, and on Tuesdays, I took Spanish classes. I had finally decided to learn the language that had been spoken around me all my life in this border town. The children reacted to my changes in different ways. Marvin, who visited more often than the others, simply accepted them as they were. "You look happy, Mom," he said once. "That's what matters." Paxson was skeptical at first, but gradually began to show interest in my new life, especially after I helped his friend, whose mother was dying of cancer, find a decent hospice and prepare emotionally for her passing. Adeline remained adamant. She saw my changes as a personal betrayal, proof that I had always lived the wrong way, not the way she wanted me to. "You've always been so practical, Mom," she said with a hint of contempt. "And now you've suddenly decided to find yourself at 67. Isn't it a little late?" I straightened the tablecloth on the dining table. The table was new, compact but foldable, just right for occasions like today. I covered it with a fancy tablecloth embroidered with snowflakes around the edge, set out a new dinner service, white with a thin blue border, and chose matching candles and napkins. Most of the dinner was already ready. The turkey, stuffed with apples and prunes, was slowly roasting in the oven. The potato gratin was waiting for its turn. The salads were dressed and cooling in the refrigerator. All that was left was to bake the apple pie, a kind of family tradition, the recipe for which had been passed down in our family from mother to daughter for 3 generations. After kneading the dough and putting it in the refrigerator for half an hour, I sat down on the sofa and opened my laptop. Another innovation in my life. I had not only mastered basic computer skills, but also learned how to use social networks, create presentations for my lectures at the hospice, and even keep a small blog about my work, which, to my surprise, found an audience among other elderly people looking for new meaning in life. Today, I wanted to check my email before the guests arrived. Among the usual notifications and newsletters was a letter from Rachel Olmo, the volunteer program coordinator at the hospital. She invited me to speak at a conference for volunteers about my experience at the hospice. "Your story is inspiring, Eunice," she wrote. "Many people think that at your age it's too late to start something new. You are proving them wrong." I smiled. 6 months ago, the thought of public speaking would have made me panic. Now I felt a little nervous, but also excited. I really had something to share. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. It was still early for the kids. When I opened the door, I saw Layla with a small box in her hands. "I thought I'd drop by before your family arrived," she explained as she came inside. "I brought dessert. Chocolate mousse. I know you're having apple pie, but can you ever have too much sweet stuff on holidays?" "Never," I laughed, hugging my friend. "Thanks, Layla. You're a real treasure." She gave me an appraising look. "You look amazing. That blouse looks great on you. Are you nervous?" "A little," I admitted. "We haven't been together for several months, after all." "They're going to be shocked when they see the new you," Layla winked. "Especially your stuck-up daughter." "Layla!" I tried to look indignant, but I couldn't hold back a smile. Over the past few months, Layla had become my closest friend, and I had told her everything about my family, including my complicated relationship with Adeline. Okay. She raised her hands in a defensive gesture. "I promise to be nice if I happen to run into them. Now I have to go. I have yoga in an hour. Let me know how it goes." After Layla left, I went back to the kitchen, took the dough out of the refrigerator, and started rolling it out for the pie. As I sliced the apples into thin slices, I remembered doing this thousands of times before. In the old kitchen, often with little Adeline standing on a chair next to me, carefully sprinkling cinnamon on the apples. Somewhere along the way, we lost that connection, that simple joy of creating something delicious and warm together. Maybe today we can find a new way to be a family, not necessarily living under the same roof, not necessarily living up to someone else's expectations, but simply accepting and respecting each other for who we are. Paxson and Tamsin arrived first, with the children and a large box decorated with festive ribbon. "Wow!" exclaimed Paxson when he saw me. "Mom, you look amazing!" "Thank you, dear," I smiled, accepting his awkward hug. "I'm glad you were all able to come." "We wouldn't miss it for the world," Tamsin assured me, kissing me on the cheek. "The kids have been talking about it all week." Their daughter Cora looked at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, you have a new hairstyle, and you look younger." "Not younger, dear," I corrected her gently. "Just different." Nash, more reserved as usual, just nodded at me and asked, "Do you have internet here? I need to check a website for a school project." "Of course," I said, giving him the Wi-Fi password, which elicited another surprised look from Paxson. "You got Wi-Fi?" He shook his head. "I thought you were barely convinced to use a cell phone." "Times are changing, son," I winked at him. "And so am I." Marvin arrived 15 minutes later with a bottle of good wine and an armful of yellow chrysanthemums. "You look beautiful as always, Mom," he said, hugging me. "And you smell wonderful. I missed your cooking on the road." "How was your last flight?" I asked, arranging the flowers in a vase. "Tiring but interesting," he said, taking off his jacket and hanging it on a hanger. "I flew over the Grand Canyon, an impressive sight." We went into the living room where Paxson was already pouring the beer he had brought into glasses. Not for the kids, Tamsin warned. Come on, Mom, I'm almost 17, Cora protested. When you're almost 17, then we'll talk, Tamsin snapped. I watched this family scene with a warm feeling. Despite all the difficulties of the past few months, I loved them all. So different, so complicated, but so dear to me. Adeline was the last to arrive, without Lloyd, but with Avery. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that even her skillful makeup couldn't hide. Lloyd sends his apologies, she said instead of a greeting. He has an urgent business meeting. On Sunday? Paxson asked in surprise. Not everyone works a schedule like you do, Adeline snapped. I hurried to intervene, sensing the tension building. Come in, dear. Avery, how's school? The boy shrugged. Fine, Grandma. He got top marks for his science project, Adeline announced proudly. His work will be entered in the regional competition. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. What was the project about? The effects of air pollution on plants, Avery replied, perking up a little. I conducted experiments with different species. That sounds fascinating. I'd love to hear more, I said. And to my surprise, Avery nodded with interest. Lunch went much better than I had expected. The turkey was juicy, the gratin was fragrant, and the apple pie was unanimously declared the best in years. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from Cora and Nash's schoolwork to Marvin's latest trip, from Paxson's new clients to Tamsin's problems with her boss. Only Adeline was unusually quiet, joining the conversation only when asked a direct question. After dessert, the children, even the teenagers, went to the living room to watch a movie on my new smart TV, another purchase that surprised Paxson. The adults remained at the table with coffee and liqueur. So, Mom, Paxson looked at me with a slight smile. Tell us about your work at the hospice. Sounds unusual. Yes, I'd like to hear more about it too, Marvin chimed in. You didn't tell us much when we saw you last time. I took a sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. It's a really unusual job, I began. I counsel patients and their families about palliative care, helping them make difficult decisions about the end of life. Sometimes I just talk to people who need someone to talk to. That sounds depressing, Adeline grimaced. Talking about death all the time. Not really, I shook my head. We talk more about life, about how to live the time you have left with dignity, without pain, surrounded by people who love you. It's emotionally difficult, but also very meaningful. And you get paid for that? Paxson asked. Yes, it's a paid position, not a lot, but enough to feel financially independent. I don't understand why you need this, Adeline shook her head. You have money from selling the house. You could just enjoy your retirement, travel, relax. I need to feel useful, I replied simply, to know that I'm doing something meaningful for others. There was a pause. Marvin thoughtfully twirled his glass of liqueur. I think it's great, Mom, he said finally. You've always been caring and thoughtful. I think you're perfect for this kind of work. Thank you, dear, I smiled gratefully. And you look amazing, added Paxson. Seriously, I didn't recognize you when I walked in. Your hair, your clothes. You look like you've aged backward 10 years. 15, I'd say, agreed Marvin. I laughed. Don't exaggerate. I just changed my style a little. I have a new friend, Layla, who helped me update my wardrobe and made an appointment for me at her hairdresser's. This Layla, is she a good person? Tamsin asked cautiously. Isn't she trying to, take advantage of your kindness? Layla is a wonderful person. I shook my head. She's a widow, like me. She used to own a restaurant, now she's retired. She has 2 grown children who live in Oregon. We go to yoga and a book club together. A book club? Adeline didn't hide her surprise. You were never much of a reader. People change, dear, I shrugged. I have more time to read now, and I found it quite enjoyable. What else do you do in your spare time? Paxson asked. Besides yoga and book club? I'm learning Spanish, I replied. And I write a little blog about my work at the hospice. A blog? Paxson nearly choked on his coffee. You? You write a blog? Mom, who didn't know how to send an email? Times are changing, son, I repeated my morning phrase. And so am I. After coffee, we moved into the living room, where the children were finishing watching a movie. To my surprise, Avery sat down next to me and started asking me about my work. It turned out that he was thinking about a career in medicine and was interested in everything related to that field. Maybe you could show me a hospice sometime, he asked. Sure, if that's possible. I think we can arrange that, I said, touched by his interest. We'll need to get permission from the administration, but I'm sure it won't be a problem. Really? His eyes lit up. That would be cool. Avery, I don't think that's a good idea, Adeline interjected. A hospice isn't a place for children. I'm 8, Mom, the boy protested, and I want to be a doctor. I need to know all aspects of the profession. We'll discuss this later, Adeline said in a tone that brooked no argument. The evening continued. We played board games, talked, and laughed. I noticed that Paxton kept glancing at me thoughtfully, as if trying to solve some kind of puzzle. At one point, when the others were engrossed in a game of Scrabble, he sat down next to me on the couch. You know, Mom, he said quietly, I have to admit I was wrong. When you decided to sell the house and start a new life, I thought it was some kind of whim, that you'd soon come to your senses and come back. But now I see that you've really blossomed. You look happy, passionate, full of life, and I'm happy for you. I really am. Thank you, Paxton. I squeezed his hand. That means a lot to me. And I want to apologize, he continued, looking away, for how we all took you for granted, especially after your father died. We got so used to you always being there, always ready to help, that we forgot you had your own life, your own dreams. It's okay, dear, I smiled. I'm to blame too. I let it happen for years. Sometimes it takes a jolt to change things. You mean what Adeline said at her birthday party? He looked at me intently. About the maid? I nodded. Partly. That was the last straw, but the problems had been building up for a long time. She didn't mean to hurt you, Paxton sighed. Adeline is just like that. She always cares about her appearance, about how she looks to others. I guess it's because of Lloyd and his family. They always look down on us. I know, I said softly, and I don't hold it against her. I hope that in time she'll understand that I did what I had to do, not to spite her. Paxton nodded and went back to his game. I stayed sitting on the sofa, watching my family, feeling a strange sense of peace. Something had changed. Not just in me, but in our relationship. Something was beginning to heal. When it started to get dark, the guests began to leave. Tamsin hugged me especially tightly. Come visit us more often, she whispered. The kids miss you, and so do I. Marvin promised to stop by in 2 weeks when he was passing through Calexico on his way to Los Angeles. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said as he left. You're a real role model. Adeline and Avery were the last to leave. The boy hugged me tightly and said quietly, I really want to see where you work, Grandma. Please make it happen. I'll try, dear, I promised. Adeline had been a little distant throughout the visit, but she hugged me goodbye, quickly, formally, but it was progress compared to our last meeting. You look good, Mom, she said tersely. That color suits you. Thank you, dear, I smiled. How's Lloyd? Was he really busy today? Something flashed in her eyes, pain, uncertainty, fear. Yes, of course, she said too quickly. He has a lot of work right now, a big project. I understand. I didn't press the issue. Give him my best. When everyone had left, I cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, and stepped out onto the small balcony of my apartment. Nighttime Calexico spread out before me, twinkling with lights. Somewhere out there, in one of those houses, Adeline was probably crying into her pillow because of problems with her husband that she wasn't ready to admit. Somewhere out there, Paxton was probably discussing the changes in me with Tamsin. Somewhere out there, Marvin was preparing for another long trip, packing his things for the road. And I stood there, in my new home, feeling surprisingly whole. It was as if all the pieces of my life were finally coming together to form a meaningful picture. Yes, there had been losses. My home, my familiar routine, some illusions about my relationship with my children. But the gains seemed to outweigh them. A new job that gave me a sense of purpose. New friends who accepted me for who I was. A new understanding of myself and my capabilities. My phone beeped, signaling a message. It was Layla. How did it go? Are they shocked by the new you? I smiled and replied, better than I expected. I'll tell you tomorrow at yoga. Thanks for the dessert. Everyone loved it. Back in my room, I noticed Avery's notebook. Flipping through it, I saw neat notes about plants, diagrams, observations. My grandson was really serious about science. I would have to talk to the hospice administration about the possibility of him visiting, maybe not as a visitor, but as a participant in some volunteer program for school children. It would be great to support his interest in medicine. As I lay down to sleep, I thought about how much my life had changed in the last 6 months. Who would have thought that at 67 I would find a new calling, new friends, a new lifestyle? Who could have imagined that a decision made in a moment of deep hurt would lead to such an amazing transformation? Perhaps that is the secret to a happy life. Never stop changing, learning, growing. Never think it's too late to start something new. Never let others define your limits and possibilities. With that thought, I closed my eyes and fell into a peaceful, restful sleep that I hadn't known in many years.